Hello, everyone. This is David, and tonight's movie that we watched is Q, the Winged Serpent. Now, this was a request by one of the viewers, and actually, this was on my original list of movies to watch, but I couldn't find it. And coming coming out of the Godzilla stuff, I managed to find a copy and actually watch it. This was my first time ever seeing it, so completely new. And my first impression of this is a very simple one, and it is very 80s. This was made in 1982, and it feels like another film. Now, I believe this takes place in New York. Yeah, it takes place in New York, and it reminds me of another movie from the 80s. It's very 80s that takes place in New York, and that is the movie Chud. There's a lot of similarities in terms of just sort of how the movie, not in how the movie is per se or what it's about, because obviously this one's about a winged serpent, if you will, and Chud is about underground kind of Morlock characters. So obviously those films are pretty different. But that being said, it has a lot in common in the way their plot structure is. There's a lot of threads in these films, and it's kind of strange. Like, I've gotten used to the very straightforward, very simple plots that Sci-Fi Channel and other such movies or movie companies, if you will, like to put out, where it's like, there's a monster kill people, people dead, and that's about, like, and then at the end the monster gets defeated, or is it? That's been the plot of movies for like the last, I want to say, 20 years at this point, in terms of B movies. I mean, obviously there's still cinematic masterpieces happening, granted, but in terms of B movies, they become more accessible, and more of them, in my opinion, being produced, and that it kind of follow that simple formula. But this one, very kind of all over the place, honestly. So we'll start off where we start off, and that is with something's murdering people in New York, and some people getting murdered. The first thing that actually happens, and there's a window washer who gets his head bitten off, and these people investigating it. All the different police investigators trying to figure out the hell's going on. And meanwhile, while that's happening, there's this subplot of these mafia guys and this kind of squirrely, like, spineless guy. And I always hate this character, so it was interesting to see what happened to him in this movie. The spineless, like, character who, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But suffice it to say, he ends up getting involved with the jewel heist that the mob guys do, and he originally doesn't want to have a gun. He doesn't want to go in the car, or he wants to stay in the car. And they're like, "No, you're coming in." And he ends up getting away with the jewels, but he ends up getting hit by a car and losing the jewels, and then runs for it because he's so scared, and ends up in the Chrysler Building. And it turns out, in the roof of the Chrysler Building, that's where the creature that's been murdering everyone is hanging out. And so he knows where the nest of the creature, we'll call it Quetzalcoatl, because that's what it's allegedly supposed to be. We don't really get a definitive answer if it was Quetzalcoatl or some other sort of creature. The idea is that it was conjured by basically Aztec sacrifices. However, the nature of the sacrifices leaves many questions, and I'll get to that. Well, I'll get to that right now, because this movie is fairly short in terms of what's going on in its plot. So you got that guy, you got the police detective, but also there's this string of bizarre murders, other than the decapitations and people and mangled body parts falling on passersby from the giant flying creature. Basically, people are being ritually sacrificed. They find a body that's been completely flayed of its skin, and that's a problem. They're trying to, they think it's connected, but at the same time it's not, and they talk to this professor, and he tells them about the Aztec gods and all that stuff, and how Quetzalcoatl was like the one you'd make sacrifices to. And I've done a bit of studying on the Aztec pantheon, and not for this, but in tangential things. But Not particularly well known as, like, say, the Greek or Norse, or even say the Loa of the Vodun or voodoo religions, if you will. But the Aztec deities are interesting, and it's because they all require one thing, and that is blood. They all require sacrifices. Now, Quetzalcoatl, of all of the gods, was in from Western point of view, the nicest. He required the least sacrifices in terms of things. Now, the initial sacrifice of the flayed skin reminded me of Hipetotec, the flayed god of, I believe, death and rebirth, or growth, stuff like that. And yeah, so a lot of times what'll happen is whenever they need to use an Aztec god, they'll use Quetzalcoatl because he's the most well known. But there's a host of other gods. I'm not going to try to pronounce all of them because they're all in Mesoamerican, and I have a very hard time pronouncing anything that isn't in English, and even stuff that is in English. So Hipetotec is pretty easy to pronounce, but like they go all over the place in terms of, and they are not short names. In terms of length, Quetzalcoatl is quite a mouthful, and all the rest of them are about that complicated. So there's a crazy guy going around, a crazy Aztec priest going around sacrificing people. Now, the thing about it is, you have to be willing for these sacrifices for them to work. But apparently they have worked, because they conjured up this creature, this dragon, that's going around murdering people. So the police are investigating that. They're investigating the murders, and they're investigating the guy from the jewel heist because they brought him in. It turns out he goes to his girlfriend's house. He has a very bad relationship with his girlfriend. Not bad relationship, but he's basically like this asshole, and he's on hard times. He's always down in his luck. He's one of those kind of characters. And the mafia guys come, and they're kind of pushing him, and he runs away. And he eventually tells them, "Yeah, I can show you where I hid the diamonds," because he doesn't know where the diamonds are. But they're gonna literally beat him to death if he doesn't give them the diamonds, because they think he has them. So he's like, "Well, I'll take you where they are." So he takes them to the Chrysler Building, and Quetzalcoatl kills them and eats them, or does whatever it does with them. I assume eats. Okay, so that keeps happening. Well, that doesn't keep happening, but he does that to them, and the police bring him in, and he's talking with them, and he's they put him in jail for a little bit for basically being involved in the jewel heist. And he basically says, "Well, I know where the critter is, the monster, and if you basically give in to my demands, I will tell you where it is." And his demands are basically, I want to be acquitted of all past crimes. You can't convict me on any past crimes that I have convicted or I have done. You can't. You have to give me $1 million, and you have to give me basically rights to the body of the creature. No one else can have this, and rights to the story, basically. So so they don't want to give in, but they give in to it, and so he basically tries to get that. They go up to the Chrysler Building. Q's not there, but there's an egg. They shoot the egg. A little baby kind of comes out. They kill the baby. So you're like, okay, that's fair enough. Meanwhile, there's another sacrifice going on at this warehouse. They track down the guy, fight the guy. They fight the guy. The guy runs away. They shoot the guy that was being sacrificed. Don't know why the guy did that, but he's like, "Oh, you saw him. He was coming at me." So my guess is that guy had never really been on the case before. They get attacked. Quetzalcoatl eventually comes back to the Chrysler Building. It kills a couple more people, throws a couple people off the building, and they shoot him down. Explains why the Aztecs died out to the Spanish, because their gods were not immune to bullets. That being said, the dragon I'm going to call it the dragon Quetzalcoatl, as depicted here, is not it is a flying serpent, but it is not a feathered serpent. Now that's a keen difference. Throughout the world, dragons take many myriad shapes and forms. Quetzalcoatl was in fact a dragon, but he was not what we consider Western dragons, which are basically fire drakes, if you will. Classic example, Smaug. He has 4 legs, 2 wings, a tail, breathes fire. That is a Western dragon, if you will. There are Eastern dragons from Japan, China, that area, and they take the form of a long snake-like body with 4 legs, and 4 legs. They typically have antlers and long whiskers, kind of like almost like a catfish, but they kind of form like a mustache. And they have a myriad of mystical abilities, and generally aren't considered bad things. They're generally considered omens of good luck and wise creatures, representations of the physical elements and whatnot. Well, in Mesoamerica, and with the Aztecs at least, the dragon took the form of what is called a feathered serpent. And it's kind of hard to think about what a feathered serpent is, but suffice it to say, it's kind of like a wyvern, if you will, except it doesn't have feet. So it's like a combination of different things. It is basically a big snake that has wings and can fly, but is covered in feathers, typically brilliant feathers of all variety of color. And they're very pretty looking. They're very beautiful to look at. It's basically like a giant peacock of a dragon, if you will, parrot or whatnot. Very, very different from Western or even Eastern dragons. And I'm not really sure the role that the actual feathered serpent played in their mythologies, because I haven't researched that particularly, but Quetzalcoatl was one of their deities, and he happened to be one of these creatures as well. So that's an interesting side note. Kind of going off into Mayan, spiraling off into, not Mayan, but Aztec mythology here. And I'm by no means an expert. I know some stuff about it, more than the average person. This movie is okay. It does end on a cliffhanger with another egg at a different nest cracking open and something coming out. We presume the baby dragon. But there was never a sequel made. And I will posit a reason as to why it wasn't made, and that is a simple matter of the monster really isn't in this movie. The movie's about 90 minutes, 93 minutes, a little bit longer than 90, but it's only in it for like maybe 5 minutes, like total runtime. You see a flash of it here or there, see a flash of it there, you see a claw come down and pick someone up. But in terms of like actual monster action, it is in it very little of the time. And that's unfortunate. I would have liked to see more. And it's done in a stop-motion style, which is rare in the 80s, but it looks okay. It's definitely passable. Some of the effects look a little silly, but it was the early 80s. It was a low-budget film. I'm giving it a pass. That being said, this is an interesting film. It has a lot of different elements. There's like a police investigation. There's that whole little plot with the kind of spineless guy. That being said, if you're in it for the monster, you're going to be a little disappointed because he doesn't play that big of a role. If you're in it for all the rest of that stuff, it's pretty interesting in those terms. It definitely feels like New York City in the 80s. I'll give you that. So, another question I always had was, watching this is, how did no one notice? I mean, I think they mentioned like it only goes out when the sun's overhead, so when people look up they can't see it, or they're temporarily blinded. But there's like all sorts of stuff that's going around New York City all the time, from like helicopters and all sorts of stuff. Some like just people on rooftops seeing the thing fly by. I mean, like, it's murdering people, but it's not murdering like everyone that's on a rooftop. So I don't know, but I guess it just wasn't there that long. But suffice to say, I don't know how it gets around. It's very stealthy apparently. But anyway, so this is a pretty good one, all things considered. Not one for the kids though. There's nudity, there's violence, pretty graphic, all things considered. You mean you see severed legs, severed heads, that kind of stuff. It's all cheesy now, but not for the little kids certainly. Definitely, I want to say this is still a soft R, if you will. The effects aren't exactly gonna scare anyone, but you don't want youngsters seeing it. But anyway, yeah, definitely check it out if you're interested in anything I've had to say. All right, folks. Good night.